So, I was gonna go to talking about why the state of Illinois is so on that one map blue. So this is the deposits of glacial materials in the state of Illinois. So we've had a couple major glaciations. So the major glaciation was called the Illinoisan. Well, that was the not the last one, but the one before that. And the Illinoisan went all the way down to here. And you can see this is where the maximum Illinoisan went. And if you're ever down out to Galena or you go downstate, all of a sudden it gets really hilly and seems kind of different. Well, it is. It really is. This was the maximum glacial extent of the Illinoisan. This right here is the maximum extent of the glacier of the Wisconsinan, which was our last glacial maximum. So if you were here at 12,000 years ago in the state in Illinois, and especially DeKalb here, there would have been ice. And if you went from DeKalb, I mean, I don't know if you can see it real well in here. Here's DeKalb, the map and stuff like that from DeKalb. So NIU is here in the center. And if you go out west and you go and cross over the county line right here, there's the county line with, oh, maybe I can focus in a little bit more on this. Let's see here. Should I make them larger? No. Well, okay. Oh, maybe if I move me out of the way. There we go. Still it's fuzzy, but that's okay. So if we go from here, there's DeKalb. We had a lot of ice and stuff like that. If you head west on 38 and you head to a town called Creston, you've reached the crest of the last glacial. The end of a glacier is called a moraine. So that's the moraine. And what happens at a moraine is that the glacier's there and it's dumping tons of materials right on that edge of the material. And so it builds up like a little hill out in it. And so that's the city of Creston. So if we went out west, we'd hit the end of the glacial maximum. And then if we look out further west, since we get to the high point in Creston, we look out, it's big and flat area. Well, that was the glacial outwash, or the area that were out in front of the glaciers. And then we get into the Illinoisan over there. And so we have these hills that are right here, and you can see them in DeKalb County, and then they go all the way downstate and in there, and then these different lines, these are the moraines that are in there. And these different moraines, one of the reasons that they're there is that's where the glaciers stopped, dumped a whole bunch of materials. So the glacier came out here, dumped a whole bunch of materials, and then as it was going backwards or regressing, it would deposit this material then here, and we would get these different hills that's along in here. And so we call the moraine that is at the end, that's in Creston, the Bloomington moraine, because that same moraine, we could follow it all the way downstate to the city of Bloomington. And if you go to Bloomington and you go to the south side of Bloomington, there's a little hill that's right there, and that's the same moraine. We can follow that was where the glacier stopped, and it moved and dropped off all that material over there. And so this gives us some of our hills. And this is why the state of Illinois is so flat, is because of these glaciers. And why the parts of the state, especially over by Galena and if you go down by Southern, are very different than the rest of the state is because of these glaciers that came through here. But it can't be me if I don't talk about aquifers and water. So you're just going to have to get used to it. It's just me. In the state of Illinois, we have 3 different types of aquifers that we get our drinking water from. When we talked about radium, we talked about bedrock aquifers. These are usually very deep, tens to hundreds of feet deep. It's mostly up in the northern Illinois area. So these are the bedrock geology of the state of Illinois, and so here is where a lot of our bedrock aquifers are coming from. So it's mostly up in here. This has got the radium issue into it, so I already talked about that, and so the linkages between that. We do have, there usually is really good quality. It can be a little salty. If you get too deep down, you're going to be getting into the Mount Simon, and that will get into saltier waters, because this used to be a inland sea, and so there was a lot of water that's left over it. I mean, that's why we have the Thornton Quarry area, is that was this place looked like the Florida Keys, and that was a little coral reef island that was there, and so they dug that up, and that's what you're getting when you get the Thornton Quarry. When we talked about the Big Dig project and the TARP project, that's why those are there. That's why it's called Stony Island. It was an island, so okay. So we could get into some saltier water if we get to lower ones, but generally it's good quality. There is some radium issues with it. The other type of aquifer is called alluvial. What does alluvial mean? Alluvial means it's along a river. So if these are aquifers that are located right next to major river sources, so if you're getting your water from right near like one of the major rivers, you may be into an alluvial aquifer. So it's referring to coming from a river aquifer. And so here's just an example of one really far downstate where this whole area is the major aquifer. This is the Mississippi River alluvial aquifer that's along in here. So this goes down to Missouri and Arkansas and everything. So anybody who's getting water from in here is getting water from an alluvial aquifer. There generally are known locations. It's very easy to find them. Sometimes these, we know where we're drilling, but it can be kind of deep. And then once you start to drill into bedrock, it can get a little more difficult. We know exactly where these rivers are because we can see the rivers today. We can usually get large supplies of water from them because they're usually sands and gravels located next to rivers because of the way rivers work. They deposit lots of sands and gravels when they're high flow. So when you have a lot of water moving through a river, it will move. It has enough energy to be able to move sand and gravel. And so when it floods, it usually has a lot of energy. And then when the water calms down and it's not flowing, the sand and gravels are the first things to go out, and then the clay will come out afterwards when it settles down. And so a lot of times these will have a lot of sand and gravels into it. So they're usually large supplies because you're having water move through sand and gravel. Usually there's good quality water, but susceptible to contamination. And we talked a lot about contamination. This would be an unconfined aquifer in a lot of locations, unless there's a large amount of clay that comes on top of it. But generally, these are susceptible to contamination because they are generally shallow and located near the surface. The other one that I want to talk, and we're going to spend a long time talking about this kind of stuff, and talking about glaciers, glacial aquifers. So this is something that is not unique to Illinois, but that area which I showed that covers that whole Midwestern part. We talked about Woburn, Massachusetts. That's a glacial aquifer. We talked about TCE, so a lot of times some of this stuff all kind of comes back and around and again and stuff like that. So glacier aquifers. So glacial aquifers are aquifers that were created during glacier times. So the glaciers came in and scoured the rock out and then created a valley. And then they got filled back in. That glaciers came in, and where there was low-lying areas, they dumped a whole bunch of stuff into it, and so they filled back in those valleys. So you would usually find at the bottom of the valleys lots of sand and gravels at the bottom of them because they're getting refilled in, they're getting flooded. Just like I talked about alluvial aquifers, they'll get filled with sand and gravels in the bottom of them. They'll get buried under the glaciers. A lot of times glaciers, especially if you're on what's called a ground moraine. A ground moraine is this big, long area of flat that's underneath the main part of the glacier, not the ends. Those are terminal moraines. Terminal moraines are forming those hills. Ground moraine is usually flat, and in our area, it laid down at least 100 feet of clay. It's called the Tiscoa till. Till is just a term referring to glacier materials and stuff, and that glaciers laid down this 100 feet of this great Tiscoa till. It really helps to protect our aquifers. It really does. It does a great job. It's got very low hydraulic conductivity, so make a great place to put a landfill. So this right here is what's called the Paleo Mississippi. The Mississippi River used to flow through the state of Illinois over here instead of on the edge. It used to flow through this area, and it scoured out this aquifer here. Over here, this area here is called the Troy Valley, and this is what we're going to spend some time talking about because this is where we get our water from, the city of DeKalb. And then we'll mention about this is the Mohammed Aquifer, which is what's called a sole source aquifer. We'll talk about that in a second, but this is the Mohammed Aquifer that helps a water supply for the city of Urbana-Champaign. So you can see where they're located. They're small, they're isolated. The water quality can be anywhere from good to poor depending on where you're at in there. Sometimes it's hard to find these things, and so we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this in the state of Illinois. So glacier valleys, they're buried. So Sometimes we don't know where they are. It took a while for us to figure out where these things are. And if you notice, there's like these little tributaries that are leading into it. Well, where are they located? So sometimes we don't know exactly where they are, but where we know where the big ones are, we know their locations and they supply a lot of water. One of the reasons, like I said, was because they're usually filled at the bottoms with sand and stuff. Now you can get some isolated areas. So these are little aquifers that come in here. These little interbedded aquifers, and it comes back with what I was talking about with alluvial aquifers. Is you'll have the water flowing through with lots of energy. It'll lay down sands and gravels, and then it'll bury itself with these clays because of the calming water. But all of a sudden, you'll get a little spurt of something, and it'll lay down some more of this, and it's a very short-lived systems inside of there. We're going to talk about Lake Agassiz and how that impacts a lot of things, but those impact a lot of the water quality issues is if you have these little lenses or these big areas in there. As I mentioned before, down in Urbana-Champaign, they have what's called the Mohammed Aquifer. So here's Illinois. Here is the Mohammed Aquifer. It does cross over into the state of Indiana. And so this is the groundwater monitoring network. It is a network that is being funded by the federal government in order so that we can have really good handle on our groundwater resources across the country. For right now, it's doing what kind of water levels do we have, and then we're also adding in water quality. And this is interstate, and they're bringing in it. One of the first aquifers that was tested in the system was I don't know if you guys can hear the horn talking. It's my TV, sorry. Was the Mohammed Aquifer, which is right in here. And the Mohammed Aquifer, again, is a glacial aquifer that was formed from a river that scoured out this. Here's the geology of the area and stuff like that. So we've got sands and gravels. In the base of it, this is where a lot of the cities are getting their water supply from. And this aquifer is what's considered a sole source aquifer, meaning that this is the only source of water for these communities. These communities in here, there is no other source of water. There isn't a river. You can't go get Lake Michigan water. You can't get Mississippi River water. You can't get any of that. And so this is their only sole source of drinking water. And so because of that designation, it means that the areas in which the aquifer, the areas above it to protect it from pollution are, you can't build certain types of activities there, such as landfills. You can't put radioactivity in there. And there is some controversy over a very old landfill that was in there already, but here's the city of Mohammed. There is some issues, but it's considered a sole source. So if you are outside of the aquifer, outside of the this glacial aquifer, then you can build certain things, but you can't right on top of the aquifer.